The small town of Haven Creek had its mysteries, but nothing like this. When Max, the town's wandering dog, appeared at the police station day after day, no one thought much of it. But Detective Enrique soon realized the dog wasn't just looking for attention, he was trying to tell them something. What started as a simple chase through empty streets led Enrique to a dark discovery hidden beneath an abandoned house. Children had gone missing, a sinister operation had been uncovered, and time was running out. Share your gratitude by liking and subscribing to the channel and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss any stories. Max was a dog everyone knew in the small town of Haven Creek, Texas. He was a mixed breed, with scruffy brown fur and lively, curious eyes. Max spent his days running through the streets, playing in the park, and visiting neighbors. People adored him, always offering treats and pats on the head, but there was something mysterious about Max. No one knew exactly where he came from or where he was going. At night, he roamed freely, like a spirit who belonged to the town but never stayed in one place for long. He had no fixed home, and no one had ever seen him sleep in a cozy bed or curl up in a warm corner. Some believed Max was searching for something. Perhaps a place to call home, or maybe someone in particular. He was a mystery, loved by all but never truly settling down. And while the people of Haven Creek didn't question his wanderings, they couldn't help but wonder why he was always on the move. Then one day, Max did something unusual. Instead of his usual route through the town, he made his way to the police station. At first, it seemed like just another curious visit, but it soon became clear that Max had a purpose. He barked incessantly and ran back and forth, trying to get the attention of the officers. His behavior wasn't normal, and it caught the eye of those inside. The officers were puzzled. They tried to shoo him away, offering him treats, hoping he would wander off like usual. But Max wasn't having it. Every day he returned, barking and moving frantically, as if to say, "I have something important to show you." His determination finally caught the attention of Detective Enrique, a seasoned officer with a sharp eye for details. Enrique had initially ignored the dog's persistent behavior, but now he found himself drawn in by Max's strange insistence. One evening, as the sun began to set, Max appeared at the station again. This time, Enrique decided to follow him. Grabbing his coat, he stepped outside and watched as Max darted into the street. Enrique followed cautiously, unsure of what to expect. He thought Max might lead him on a wild goose chase, but as they wound through the streets, it became clear that the dog had a destination in mind. "Where are you taking me, boy?" Enrique muttered under his breath, the unease growing with each passing step. Max didn't bark in response this time. Instead, he maintained a steady pace, occasionally sniffing the air, his ears perking up at the slightest sound. They soon left the familiar streets behind, entering a more remote area where houses were sparse and shadows stretched long in the fading light. Enrique noticed a shift in Max's behavior. The dog, who had been so fluid in his movements, began to stop every few feet, lifting his head to sniff the air more intently. His fur bristled slightly, and a low growl rumbled from his throat as they approached a specific point on the path. "What is it, Max?" Enrique wondered, his pulse quickening. After walking for nearly 30 minutes, they arrived at an old, abandoned house. The place was in ruins, its windows shattered, and the front door hanging from rusty hinges. Weeds had overtaken the yard, and the path leading to the entrance was barely visible. Max stopped in front of the house and began barking loudly, as if urging Enrique to act. The dog ran back and forth, scratching at the door with his paws, clearly desperate for Enrique to follow his lead. Detective Enrique approached the abandoned house cautiously, his years of investigative instincts kicking in. Max, the usually calm dog, was frantically scratching the door as if urging Enrique to act fast. The detective's hand instinctively rested on the grip of his holstered gun, feeling the familiar weight of protection. Something about this situation was setting off alarm bells in his mind. With a deep breath, Enrique gently pushed the creaking door open. The house, dilapidated and neglected, welcomed them with the stale scent of mold and rot. The dying sunlight barely penetrated through the cracked windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the dusty furniture. Cobwebs dangled from every corner, and the silence in the house was oppressive, as if it was a tomb for forgotten secrets. Max wasted no time. He trotted inside, nose to the ground, carefully sniffing every corner of the dimly lit room. Enrique followed closely, every step on the wooden floor emitting a loud creak, heightening the tension. The air was thick, damp, and carried a musty smell that made breathing feel heavy. Max headed towards a far corner of the main room, his fur bristling as if he sensed danger. Enrique's pulse quickened. The dog started digging at the floorboards, his nails scraping noisily against the worn wood. Enrique, turning on his flashlight, aimed its beam where Max was focused. Under the flickering light, he noticed the floorboards were uneven, hastily replaced, as if someone had recently hidden something beneath them. Crouching down, Enrique brushed his fingers over the cold, damp wood. It took considerable effort, but he managed to pry one of the floorboards loose. Max barked insistently, his excitement and nervousness escalating as Enrique pulled up more of the boards. Beneath them was a rusty iron hatch, nearly invisible if not for the dog's persistence. "This isn't right," Enrique muttered, dread creeping into his voice. Whatever was behind that door wasn't going to be good. With a deep breath, he grasped the old handle and yanked the door open. The rusty metal groaned, protesting as it gave way, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that descended into what looked like a basement. A cold, pungent draft hit him in the face, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. Max was already halfway down the stairs, his nails tapping softly against the wooden steps. Enrique, now fully on edge, followed carefully, every creak under his boots amplifying the eerie silence. The air grew colder, more oppressive, as they ventured deeper into the house's underbelly. At the bottom of the staircase, Enrique's flashlight revealed a small, suffocating room. The walls were lined with mold, and the ceiling hung low, adding to the claustrophobic atmosphere. Max was barking and scratching at a pile of boxes stacked haphazardly in one corner of the room, as if something important was hidden behind them. Enrique approached cautiously, moving the boxes one by one, his flashlight shaking slightly as the adrenaline surged through him. After shifting the final box, Enrique found another iron door, smaller but less rusted than the one above. It was slightly ajar, as though someone had entered, or exited, recently, but time had left its mark, sealing it almost shut. "What the hell is this?" Enrique whispered, feeling the cold hand of fear grip his chest. Max barked more insistently now, as if urging him to hurry. With a deep breath, Enrique pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the small space. His flashlight illuminated a narrow corridor ahead, the walls damp and cracked. The air was heavier now, and the foul odor intensified, a mix of rot and something far worse. Max advanced cautiously, sniffing the ground, his ears perked up at every little sound. The dog, who had been brave and resolute, now moved with a kind of restrained caution, sensing that whatever lay ahead was something no living being should face. Enrique's heart pounded as he followed Max, each step on the concrete floor magnifying the dread in his gut. What awaited them at the end of that dark corridor? If you're enjoying the story, share your gratitude and hope by liking and subscribing to the channel and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss any stories. Detective Enrique's footsteps echoed softly as he and Max moved deeper into the unsettling corridor. Every step felt heavier, as if the weight of the darkness itself was pressing down on them. The flashlight beam cut through the shadows, illuminating walls lined with damp streaks, and the unmistakable stench of decay filled the air. Max slowed his pace, his body tense as he approached yet another door. Unlike the others, this one was intact and showed signs of recent use. Its hinges were well oiled, and the handle gleamed in the dim light. This wasn't just an abandoned, forgotten part of the house. Someone had been here, and recently. Enrique's pulse quickened as he gripped the door handle. With a silent nod to Max, who stood poised beside him, Enrique turned the handle and pushed the door open. The silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm. Inside, the room was smaller than the others. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with disorganized papers, old files, and cardboard boxes, giving the space a disordered, chaotic feel. It was an unexpected discovery in such a desolate place, but what really caught Enrique's attention was how clean the room appeared compared to the rest of the house. It was clear that someone had been actively using it as a hideout, a place to store something important. Max, ever the vigilant companion, darted toward one of the shelves. His nose pressed against the papers, sniffing fervently. Enrique, his heart pounding in his chest, stepped closer and began to inspect the documents. Pulling a few of the papers from the shelves, Enrique quickly realized they weren't just old scraps. He flipped through passports, each one with a different name, yet strangely, the photos seemed similar, as though someone had been altering them. Every name was carefully written, but the same eerie, unsettling feeling crept over him, the identities didn't seem real. "These are fake," he muttered under his breath. Max's barking grew more insistent as he sniffed around a pile of boxes at the far end of the room. Enrique moved toward him, pushing aside more papers, uncovering layers of hidden files. Then, something stopped him cold. Max had found a small, dusty metal box tucked in the corner beneath the boxes. Enrique hesitated for a moment before crouching down to open it. The lock was old, but with a firm pull, it gave way. Inside, Enrique found a collection of neatly stacked documents, but these were different. They weren't the hastily made, forged identities like the others. These were detailed files, with photographs of children, descriptions of their physical features, and fingerprints. Enrique's blood ran cold as he flipped through the files. They contained more than just names, they held complete identities, but none of them seemed to match any missing children's reports he had ever seen. It was as if these kids had been erased from any official record. Worse still, some of the files appeared incomplete, missing vital information, as if whoever had made them wanted the children to disappear forever. Max barked again, this time more frantically. Enrique pulled out a small envelope from the metal box. When he opened it, his heart sank. Inside were Polaroid photos, dozens of them. Each one captured the face of a different child. Their expressions were haunting: fear, pain, confusion, and they were all in deplorable conditions. Some looked too weak to stand, their eyes sunken, their bodies frail. "Oh my God," Enrique whispered, feeling the weight of the horrific discovery sink in. The children in the photos weren't just missing. They had been taken, hidden, maybe trafficked, and there was no telling how long this had been going on. Whoever was behind this had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, but Max, with his unrelenting instincts, had led Enrique right to it. Enrique stuffed the photos and key documents into his jacket, knowing these were the leads he needed to expose this operation. His mind raced with questions: how deep did this go? How many children were involved? And more importantly, were any of them still alive? Max, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, stayed close by Enrique's side, his soft barks echoing in the small room. The detective knew they had to leave and fast. Whoever was running this operation could return at any moment, and he didn't want to risk being caught in this labyrinth of horrors. "Come on, boy," Enrique said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to get out of here." Max wagged his tail slightly but remained on edge as they made their way back through the darkened corridor. As they reached the stairwell, Enrique couldn't help but feel the weight of the lives impacted by what they had just uncovered. There was no doubt in his mind that this was bigger than he had ever anticipated. Back at the surface, the night air hit Enrique like a slap, cold and biting after the stifling basement. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. He needed to get this information to the authorities immediately. This wasn't just a local issue, it was part of something far more sinister. As Enrique and Max made their way back to town, a storm of thoughts filled his mind. The nightmare they had uncovered wasn't over, not by a long shot. And if they didn't act quickly, more innocent lives could be lost. Detective Enrique and Max hurried back to the police station, the weight of the discovery bearing down on Enrique like a heavy storm cloud. The night air was thick with tension, and even Max, usually alert but calm, seemed to sense the urgency, his pace quick and determined. Enrique's mind raced. The documents, the fake identities, the children's photos, all of it pointed to something much larger, more organized, and far more dangerous than he had anticipated. As soon as they reached the station, Enrique didn't waste a second. Inside, the dim lights flickered as he rushed past his colleagues, some of whom gave him curious glances. Max trailed close behind, his eyes still alert as he followed Enrique into the operations room. Enrique slapped the stack of documents on the table and began sifting through them again, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. The chief of police, a grizzled veteran named Officer Alves, noticed the commotion and approached with a concerned frown. "Enrique, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Enrique's eyes met the chief's, and for a moment, he hesitated, unsure of how to explain the gravity of what he had just uncovered. "Chief, you need to see this," Enrique said, his voice barely masking the tension. He laid out the Polaroids, birth certificates, and documents on the table. The chief's face grew pale as he examined the evidence. "My God! These are children," Alves whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Where did you find this?" Enrique glanced at Max, then back at the chief. "Max led me to an abandoned house at the outskirts of town. There's a hidden basement. I found all of this down there. It's a human trafficking ring, Chief, and it's been operating under our noses." Alves's expression hardened. "And these kids," he began, his voice filled with dread. "I don't know where they are now," Enrique responded, the weight of those words sinking in. "But whoever is behind this has been using false identities and covering their tracks. This is much bigger than just Haven Creek. It's part of a network. We need to act fast." The urgency in Enrique's voice struck the room like a lightning bolt. Within minutes, the station buzzed with activity. Officers scrambled to gather intelligence, track down leads, and coordinate with national authorities. Maps of the area were spread out, and the radio crackled with updates from nearby units. Max lay quietly in the corner of the room, his eyes following the frenetic movement around him. Despite the chaos, the dog's presence brought a strange sense of calm to the room, a reminder of how this all started. As the operation plans unfolded, Enrique's phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the tech teams, who had been reviewing the documents. They'd found something critical, an address linked to some of the fake identities, just outside town. It wasn't much, but it was the first concrete lead. "Chief, we've got a location," Enrique said, his voice filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "It might be one of their safe houses. We need to move." Alves nodded firmly, his face set with determination. "We'll need everyone on this. Call in the task force. No mistakes, these people won't get a second chance." Within moments, the station transformed into a coordinated operations hub. Officers suited up, weapons were prepped, and tactical teams were briefed. The mission was clear: raid the location, rescue any children, and apprehend the perpetrators before they could flee. Enrique stood outside, staring into the night sky. The air felt colder than before, and the silence was suffocating. He knew what they were up against wasn't just a criminal organization, it was something darker, something that preyed on the most vulnerable. His thoughts wandered to the photos he had found, the terrified faces of the children, their haunting expressions. "Enrique," a familiar voice called out. It was Officer Miguel, a younger cop who had joined the force recently. "We're ready when you are." Enrique nodded, pulling himself from his thoughts. He took a deep breath, then bent down to pat Max's head. "You ready, boy?" he whispered. Max wagged his tail slightly, as if sensing that his job wasn't over yet. The convoy of police vehicles moved silently through the streets of Haven Creek, their lights off to avoid detection. The address led them down a winding road toward a secluded warehouse, surrounded by trees and distant from any prying eyes. The darkness seemed to thicken as they approached, the tension palpable inside each car. Enrique's stomach churned with a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just about bringing criminals to justice, it was about saving lives. Every second mattered, and if they weren't careful, they could lose everything. The convoy stopped just short of the warehouse. Officers disembarked quietly, moving into position around the perimeter. Enrique, leading one of the teams, approached the entrance. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, the adrenaline sharpening his senses. Inside, the warehouse was eerily quiet. The officers waited for the signal. Enrique's eyes darted around, scanning the area for any sign of movement. Max stood beside him, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, alert for any sound or scent. The signal came, a silent nod from Officer Alves, and in an instant, the officers moved. The door was breached with a sharp bang, and the tactical teams flooded inside. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of crates, rusted machinery, and old equipment scattered across the floor. The air was thick with dust and decay. "Clear the area," Enrique shouted, his voice firm and controlled as the officers fanned out, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, every creak and rustle sending a wave of anxiety through the team. Suddenly, a noise came from the far end of the warehouse. It was faint but unmistakable, footsteps. Enrique's heart leaped in his chest as he signaled the others to follow him toward the sound. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves facing a horrifying scene. Several men, armed and surprised by the raid, stood guarding a series of small metal cages. Inside, cowering and terrified, were children. Their faces were pale, their clothes ragged, and their eyes filled with a haunting mix of fear and hopelessness. Enrique didn't hesitate. "Police! Drop your weapons," he shouted as his team closed in. Chaos erupted. Shots were fired, the deafening sound of gunfire reverberating through the warehouse. Enrique and his team took cover, returning fire as they advanced. The armed men were outnumbered, and though they resisted fiercely, it wasn't long before the police overwhelmed them. With the area secure, Enrique rushed toward the cages. His heart broke at the sight of the children, frail, malnourished, and trembling. He quickly opened one of the cages and helped a small boy out, his tiny body shaking with fear. "You're safe now," Enrique whispered, his voice soft but filled with conviction. Max, as if sensing the children's distress, gently nuzzled one of the girls, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. The girl, no older than 8, reached out to stroke Max's fur, her tears mingling with a faint smile as she realized she was finally safe. The children, their faces marked by fear and exhaustion, clung to the officers as they were gently guided out of the cages. Their tiny hands trembled, eyes darting around the warehouse in disbelief, as if they couldn't quite grasp that the nightmare they had endured was finally over. Enrique's heart ached as he looked at them. How long had they been trapped here? How many others had been in their place before? Max, as always, was right beside him, moving from child to child, his presence somehow soothing the scared children. He nuzzled one little boy, who wiped away tears as he hugged the dog's neck. In that moment, Enrique realized how vital Max had been, not just in leading him to this place, but in offering comfort in a situation where words couldn't heal the trauma. As paramedics arrived to tend to the children, Enrique took a step back, watching as the officers worked swiftly to secure the area. The captured men were handcuffed and shoved into police vehicles, but Enrique's mind was already moving ahead. This wasn't over. The people behind this operation weren't here, they were still out there. They had been clever, covering their tracks with fake identities and false leads. If not for Max, this ring might have continued operating for years. Chief Alves approached, his face grim. "We got the bastards here, but this is bigger than I thought. They're well organized, and we're only seeing part of the picture." Enrique nodded. "These kids, they were hidden away like cargo. This warehouse was just one of their stops. We need to trace the entire network." Alves rubbed a hand across his tired face. "We'll start with the men we arrested. If they know anything about the leaders, we'll find out. But we need to be fast. If the rest of the ring gets wind of this, they'll scatter, and it'll be like chasing shadows." Enrique's jaw tightened. He had seen operations like this before, organizations that treated human lives as commodities, and it always came down to a race against time. But this one felt personal now. He couldn't shake the images of the children's faces from his mind. The haunted look in their eyes was something that would stay with him long after this case was closed. "Let me take Max back to the station," Enrique said, glancing at his loyal companion. "He's done more than anyone tonight." Alves gave a small, weary smile. "That dog deserves a medal, Enrique. He led us right to the heart of this thing." As the operation continued around them, Enrique signaled for Max, who trotted over obediently, his brown eyes still sharp with awareness. The two walked in silence back toward the convoy of vehicles, the cold night air feeling heavier after the horrors they had just uncovered. The drive back to the station was quiet, the adrenaline slowly fading. Max rested his head on Enrique's lap, as if he, too, needed a moment to process everything they had just been through. Enrique absently stroked the dog's fur, grateful for the bond they shared. Max had been more than just a companion tonight, he had been a guide, a protector, and now, a hero. When they arrived at the station, the atmosphere was still buzzing with activity. Officers were calling in reports, updates were coming in from surrounding districts, and a sense of urgency filled the air. Enrique knew they had uncovered something massive, but now it was about finding the people behind it. Max was exhausted but alert, his eyes tracking every movement in the station. Enrique knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "You did good, Max. We wouldn't have found them without you." Max gave a soft bark in response, his tail wagging weakly, but his eyes were still filled with that determined spark that Enrique had come to know so well. Just then, one of the junior officers approached Enrique with a phone in hand. "Detective, we just got a tip. Someone's seen movement at one of the addresses linked to the fake passports." Enrique stood up, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Where?" The officer handed him a piece of paper. "It's a warehouse about 30 miles from here. Same setup as the one we just raided. If we move fast, we might catch them before they relocate." Enrique felt his pulse quicken. This could be their last chance to catch the leaders of the operation. The criminals they had arrested tonight were low-level players, the real masterminds were still out there. "Get a team ready," Enrique ordered. "We're leaving in 5. As the officers began to mobilize, Enrique glanced down at Max, ready for another round. "Boy?" he asked. Max's ears perked up, and despite the long night, the dog's energy returned. He knew there was more to do. There always was. Within minutes, the team was back on the road, heading toward the new location. The tension in the vehicle was thick, and no one spoke. Everyone knew what was at stake. If they didn't catch the traffickers this time, the entire network could go underground for good. The warehouse loomed ahead in the darkness, even more ominous than the last. Enrique's heart pounded in his chest as the convoy approached. They stopped a distance away, the officers moving into position quietly, weapons drawn, flashlights off. Enrique glanced at Max, who sat by his side, every muscle tense as he waited for the signal. The chief's voice came through the radio. "We go in 3, 2, 1. The doors were breached with a loud bang, and the officers surged forward. Enrique and Max were right behind them, moving swiftly through the shadows. Inside, the layout was similar to the previous warehouse, with rows of crates and machinery scattered across the floor. But this time, they weren't alone. Several figures darted through the shadows, scrambling to escape. Shots rang out, and the sound of shouting filled the warehouse. Enrique's heart raced as he pressed forward, his flashlight sweeping the area. Max took off ahead of him, barking loudly as he chased down one of the fleeing men. Enrique followed, turning a corner just in time to see Max latch onto the man's arm, bringing him to the ground with a powerful force. The man struggled, but Max held firm, his growls a warning to stay down. Enrique rushed forward and quickly cuffed the man, pulling him up roughly. "Where are the kids?" Enrique demanded, his voice hard. The man sneered, spitting on the ground. "You're too late. They're gone." Enrique's stomach dropped. "What do you mean they're gone?" "They moved them an hour ago," the man replied smugly. "You'll never find them now." Rage boiled up inside Enrique, but he kept his composure. He grabbed the man by the collar and shoved him toward one of the officers. "Take him in," Enrique ordered. He turned to Max, who looked up at him, still tense from the chase. "We're not done yet, Max," Enrique said softly. "We'll find them." But deep down, he knew their window was closing fast. The words, "they're gone," echoed in Detective Enrique's mind as he stared into the dimly lit warehouse. The trafficker's smug expression only fueled his frustration. The children, their chance at freedom, had slipped away just as quickly as they had uncovered the operation. But Enrique wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Max, still panting from the chase, stayed by his side, his ears pricked up and alert. Enrique's mind raced, trying to piece together where the traffickers could have taken the children. He scanned the room, desperate for any clue, any detail they might have overlooked. Then it hit him. Enrique remembered the documents he'd found in the first warehouse. The files, the maps, there had been locations marked on some of them. Not all the addresses had been explored yet, and if they acted fast, there was a chance the kids hadn't been moved far. "Get me those files from the first warehouse." Enrique barked into his radio, already moving toward the exit. "I need them now." Within minutes, another officer arrived with the stack of papers. Enrique rifled through them, eyes scanning the maps and documents for anything that could give them a lead. His fingers froze on a particular map, and his heart skipped a beat. There was another location circled, not far from where they stood. A remote area, an old truck yard, just outside the city limits. Enrique felt a surge of hope. "This is it," he muttered. "They haven't gotten far." Chief Alves, who had been coordinating the arrests, joined Enrique, his eyes narrowing at the map. "You think they're taking them there?" "It's our best shot," Enrique said, his voice firm. "We don't have time to waste. If we don't move now, we might never find them." Alves nodded sharply. "All right, let's get the teams back in the cars. We're hitting this location hard." Enrique turned to Max, who seemed to sense the urgency. "This is it, boy. One last push." Max wagged his tail, his eyes full of energy despite the long night. The convoy of police cars once again sped through the darkened streets, the tension thicker than ever. Every second counted. Enrique couldn't stop thinking about the children, their terrified faces, their fragile bodies. The thought of them being moved further, lost to the shadows of the trafficking network, was unbearable. The truck yard appeared on the horizon, an eerie silhouette against the night sky. It was vast, littered with rusted trucks and trailers, and the darkness made it even more foreboding. The convoy stopped at a distance, and once again, the officers moved into position, their movements swift and silent. Enrique led the charge, with Max at his side, as they crept toward the main entrance. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline kicking in with every step. This was their last chance to stop the traffickers and save the children. There could be no mistakes. With a nod from Alves, the officers moved. The gates were breached, and they surged into the truck yard like a wave. Flashlights cut through the dark, illuminating the maze of trailers and trucks. Enrique moved quickly, scanning every corner, listening for any sound that could indicate where the traffickers were hiding. Max darted ahead, his nose twitching as he caught a scent. Enrique followed him, heart racing. They rounded a corner, and there, tucked behind a line of trailers, was a group of traffickers. But more importantly, beside them, huddled together in fear, were the children. "Freeze! Police!" Enrique shouted, his gun trained on the group. The traffickers panicked, scrambling to grab weapons, but the police were faster. Shots rang out as the officers moved in, taking down the traffickers one by one. Max lunged at one of the men, grabbing his arm and bringing him to the ground with a snarl. Enrique and his team quickly surrounded the children, pulling them away from the chaos. The kids were crying, shaking, but they were alive. "We've got them!" Enrique shouted into his radio, a wave of relief washing over him. The last of the traffickers were subdued, handcuffed, and led away by the officers. Enrique knelt beside the children, his heart swelling with emotion as he reassured them. "You're safe now. You're going home." Max, his fur bristling with the last remnants of adrenaline, approached one of the youngest girls. She was barely conscious, her small body trembling with exhaustion. As Max gently nudged her, the girl opened her eyes and managed a faint smile. She reached out a tiny hand to pet his head, her tears mingling with the dirt on her cheeks. Enrique's throat tightened as he watched the scene unfold. Max had done it, he had saved them. They had saved them. The nightmare was finally over. As paramedics arrived to tend to the children, Enrique stood back, watching as the little ones were wrapped in blankets and lifted into the ambulances. Max sat by his side, his body finally relaxing as he looked up at Enrique with tired but content eyes. Chief Alves approached, his expression a mix of pride and exhaustion. "You did good, Enrique," he said quietly. "And that dog of yours, he's a damn hero." Enrique glanced down at Max and smiled, patting his head. "Yeah, he is. We couldn't have done this without him." The dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a soft light over the truck yard. The operation had been long, brutal, but successful. The children were safe, and the trafficking ring had been dismantled. As Enrique looked around, the weight of what they had achieved began to sink in. The battle wasn't over, there would always be more evil to fight, but for now, they had won. And as the first rays of sunlight hit the ground, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Max, ever faithful, sat by his side, his eyes closing slowly as the exhaustion of the night caught up with him. Enrique crouched down and whispered, "Rest up, buddy. You earned it." The night's horrors would stay with them both for a long time, but as Enrique watched the children being taken to safety, he knew that, thanks to Max, they had brought light into the darkest of places. They had saved lives. And in the end, that was all that mattered. If you find the characters' journeys inspiring, give this story a like and comment to share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more uplifting stories that highlight the power of human connection and kindness.